New Zealand, Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud, sheep world, and the not-so-secret location of media zealots' nefarious fortress of cynicism, which may come as a shock to those of you who still believe I'm Australian. Generally, when it comes to screen content, New Zealand has nothing at all to complain about. We've got a relatively thriving local production industry, not to mention numerous New Zealand actors, directors, writers, and other industry professionals doing us proud on the world stage. The most obvious example, of course, being the 9+ hour New Zealand tourism advert that you may know as Lord of the Rings. Whether it be sports, agriculture, politics, or the arts, us Kiwis like to tell ourselves a national story of an underdog punching above its weight. Yet despite our best efforts to be relevant, there remains a constant thorn in our side. You see, positive on-screen portrayals of New Zealand and our people are few and far between, except for those that were made by Kiwis and/or with funding from our government. It's no wonder we throw so much money at it. And to make a bad situation even worse, there also exists a noticeable trend of international productions portraying us in a negative light. To say this is a bit triggering for us would be an understatement. These slights often spark local media coverage and a national conversation to determine the irrefutable reality of our pious deeds. But one thing we won't talk about is how our small population, natural isolation, and colonial past has seen us develop some kind of national inferiority complex, leaving us just a bit sensitive to how we believe we're being perceived in the minds of others. Seen clearly anytime a celebrity makes an offhand remark or even tweets about New Zealand. Whether it be positive or negative, it will literally be headline news here. If our media is anything to go by, we're desperately scrambling for recognition.
The flat whites are great here. Seafood's really good.
Best exemplified by our entertainment journalists often prodding celebrities into saying something nice about New Zealand.
What are your memories of New Zealand? Is there anything that you...
Sometimes we even pay them to gush.
When I think of New Zealand, I think of a place that is pure and magical, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen my entire life.
So with all this considered, you can understand that watching ourselves being immortalized on film and TV as anything but the awesome folk we believe ourselves to be is just too much to bear. Which is why I'm here to stoke the fire of bad feels and remind us all that there exists a notable history of New Zealand's on-screen slights. Admittedly among the least heinous of slights against New Zealand, in fact we should probably be thankful we get any mention at all. Star Trek uses our country in a fairly typical fashion as a mystical faraway Timbuktu of the West, because apparently you can still have isolated earthbound locales in a galactic civilization where transporters and warp drives exist. We're first name dropped in Star Trek Voyager, with Tom Paris serving time at a minimum security penal settlement in New Zealand. Australia's reputation as a prison colony apparently rubbing off on us. I get that we're dealing with a global government here, but why is an American resident like Tom Paris being sent all the way down here? And he's been convicted of treason, a pretty serious offence I would think. Yet him and the other prisoners are left to wander around with minimal restrictions. Though we come to understand that Tom doesn't present much of a threat, who knows what these other prisoners could be capable of. Does the Federation realise our islands are not that empty? I mean, someone has to look after all these sheep. And the cows, would someone think of the cows? We have millions of people and towns and cities down here, which they're potentially putting at risk. Though the prison is run by Starfleet Rehab, if I was going to look at the situation charitably, we could speculate that New Zealand is leading the way in low security rehabilitation infrastructure and personnel, but that feels like more than a stretch. Later on in Deep Space Nine, Richard Bashir is also sent to the New Zealand penal settlement after fronting up over the illegal genetic engineering of his son.
2 years. It's a minimum security penal colony in New Zealand.
Why is the Federation sending all their riffraff here? To make matters worse, the New Zealand penal settlement is literally the only Earth-based prison ever mentioned in canon. And according to the novel Pathways, it's located in Auckland, our biggest city, and my place of residence. Was this prison's far-off location meant to isolate the inmates, or outmates as it were, from other people? Because if so, they've utterly failed. I'm setting my phaser to kill as we speak.
I'll laser every one of you!
though admittedly Star Trek does go on to use New Zealand in a more positive manner, but I still get the sense they're trying to use our country to manufacture a sense of remoteness. Jake Sisko receiving a scholarship offer from the fictional Pennington School, a prestigious writing institution in Wellington, New Zealand.
Yesterday I got a communication from the Pennington School in New Zealand. They offered me a writing fellowship.
This development used as a threat to separate a father from his son and an audience from a beloved central character, because apparently Deep Space Nine being on the edge of Federation space quite away from Earth wasn't enough to create a sense of distance.
This whole thing is based on feelings?
New Zealand, in the utopian future of Star Trek, it's a fantastic place to go if you're a convict looking to sharpen your writing skills. Ford vs Ferrari covers the corporate stoush between these two major car manufacturers, leading up to the victory of Ford in the 1966 24-hour Le Mans race. As the chosen pro-tags, we've got the mercurial driver/mechanic Ken Miles, Christian Bale given a brief respite from pretending he's American.
More of that, please.
And former Le Mans winner and automotive designer Carroll Shelby, played by Matt Damon, who has entered a partnership with Ford to see them beat Ferrari in the big race. Throughout the movie, Miles showing himself to be not just an elite driver, but a fantastic mechanic and test driver as well. But a typically self-centered corporate douchebag holds a grudge against Miles for his lack of filter, doing everything possible to get him off the team, moves that are blocked at every turn by Shelby. The bittersweet end to this saga seeing Miles being ordered to slow down and allow the other Ford drivers to catch up, so the corporate peacocks can get their epic photo op. Unfortunately, due to a technicality of starting position, Miles is robbed of first place even though he had been well ahead. But what the movie glosses over completely is the fact there was another man who was also robbed of first. Miles' co-driver Denny Holm, a New Zealander who drove literally half the race, yet he doesn't get anything but a passing nod. And then there's Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, who were driving the Ford car that inadvertently won. They were barely acknowledged at all throughout the movie, and at the end they're saddled with the role of undeserving winners, despite being fantastic drivers in their own right and them not being responsible for the situation at all. It's no wonder these characters weren't focused on. The film seems to be casting them as minor villains. Even more unfortunate considering the real events leading up to the finish are in dispute. Chris Amon claiming that Ken Miles only built up his lead by failing to adhere to a Ford slowdown order.
Bruce slowed down several seconds a lap, as did the other cars, except for the Miles home car, which maintained its pace, and within a matter of several laps, Ken Miles had actually caught and passed Bruce.
Though it's not entirely clear who deserved the win on the day, this less than glowing portrayal and sidelining of these beloved Kiwi driving legends irked New Zealand petrolheads, and temporarily diminished our ability to brag about us punching above our weight in motorsport. Oh well, at least we still have Scott Dixon and SVG. Next up, we have Ender's Game, a film adaptation of a novel series, covering an ongoing war against an insectoid alien race called the Formix, whose invasion of Earth cost tens of millions of lives, and resulted in humanity reordering itself into a militaristic hegemony in the name of combating the alien threat. And it's decided the best way to accomplish this is to recruit children as their elite fighting force, believing these pliable young minds to be superior military strategists. These recruits subjected to various inhumane tests where violence and ruthlessness are encouraged, culminating in the military brass deceiving Ender and a bunch of other kids into taking charge of a real-life final battle, them thinking it another simulation, ending the war and resulting in the deaths of thousands of humans and the near total genocide of the Formix. Ender particularly dismayed after correctly suspecting the Formix had an interest in peace. Information from the novel supporting this. These aliens apparently taking a while to recognize humans as sentient, at which point they intended to cease their attacks. But surprisingly, the child soldiers and genocide aren't the worst things in this movie. That would be this guy, Mazer Rackham, the hero of the first alien invasion. Mazer defeated the Formix by killing their queen. From that point on, the powers that be deciding that Mazer best served them as a martyr. faking his death and keeping him busy as an instructor at command school in their forward base. And here's where we first meet him, when he appears out of nowhere in a young boy's bedroom. This random creeper, played by Ben Kingsley, a man of mixed British and Indian descent, and an ethnic character mainstay of cinema, horribly miscast in an ethnicity way out of his comfort zone. A half Māori New Zealander with full-face Tam Moko, the character seemingly playing into the Māori reputation as formidable warriors. Why stop there, guys? Personally, I don't think I can buy into this until I see Ben Kingsley perform a haka.
We are having a few laughs here, I'll tell you that.
It doesn't help that Mazer Rackham has the most cringeworthy sci-fi warrior name I've heard since Cypher Rage. Not to mention, he's totally complicit in the whole indoctrinate and deceive children into genociding aliens thing. But the worst offense occurs when he opens that mouth of his.
You can't absorb these kind of losses. War isn't a game where you get to reboot and start over. If I'd been smarter, I could have annihilated Petra's little doctor while you were micromanaging Bean. That can't happen, understand?
This simulation is staged around the enemy's home planet.
It's a laughably bad attempt at a Kiwi accent that comes off as a bad attempt at South African.
From now on, I am your enemy. Got it? I must have ears.
Since they're already leaning heavily into the character's Māori credentials, surely we could have found a more fitting actor for this role, especially considering we live in a world where Temuera Morrison and Cliff Curtis exist. The Crown unfortunately commits among the most heinous of all possible sins against New Zealand. They portrayed our stuff as Australian.
Whoever did this to us will hear from all of us!
In real life, the 1983 Royal Tour of Australia and New Zealand saw the world going gaga over Prince William's goo-gooing on the lawns of our government house in Auckland. Yet these cheeky bloody showrunners posit that these world-shattering events actually occurred in Australia.
Oi.
The lush green fields of New Zealand replaced by the dreary scrub of the outback borderlands. But the most serious aspect of this on-screen slight is the attribution of a beloved Kiwi toy, the Buzzy Bee, to those culture vultures across the ditch, as if they haven't already claimed enough of our treasured cultural icons. And they didn't even do the work themselves this time.
F*** letting go. You should be out there with a chainsaw going after him.
Just don't remind me that we ripped off the Buzzy Bee toy design from an American Fisher-Price toy, because we don't talk about that. To make things worse, the New Zealand leg of the tour is almost completely brushed over, and what little we do get is a dark and dingy affair. A depressing, frenetic montage that seems to imply Charles and Diana were so disturbed by a Māori cultural performance it triggered Diana's eating disorder. I get that their relationship was meant to be taking a dive at this point, but did they have to do it at our expense?
Lots of thanks. Time to piss off.
At the very least, it would have been nice if the Crown could have highlighted the Royal Tour of New Zealand in 1986, when some of our lovely folk egged and mooned the Queen. For once it would be nice to get credit where credit's due.
Villainized, persecuted, spoke truth to power, just like me. It's crazy.
A somewhat self-inflicted entry that is bound to draw the ire of New Zealand wrestling fans and perhaps the wrestling audience at large. This tag team duo starting out as the Kiwis and moving on to become the Sheep Herders. Butch and Luke gained a reputation for the brutality of their matches, but the trouble really starts once they left the sheep cliches behind and signed with the WWF, where they were transformed into a comedy act by none other than the most successful villain of the entire organization on and off the screen, Vince McMahon. Though they were always a bit rough around the edges, at this point they adopt the personas of crazed New Zealand mountain men, representing our people with perhaps the rarest and most unflattering of all Kiwi bogan archetypes.
We were attacked.
Though even saddled with this gimmicky down under redneck act, they still managed to become crowd favourites, which I would say is testament to Butch and Luke's performances. I'm definitely not here to throw shade at them. I think they did their best with the material they were given. All I'm saying is having a couple of feral bush pigs strutting around licking people while waving the New Zealand flag isn't the best of looks. Perhaps the most common and well known of slights against New Zealand, and it's not confined to the screen either, but real world maps and globes everywhere. To add insult to injury, Japan is a similarly sized landmass in the Pacific, yet they make the cut far more often than we do. Sometimes even the tiny Pacific islands north of us will be included.
Find out what the is going on, Ashley.
We'll be lucky if we get a deformed island chain to the east of Australia, our glaring absence naturally sparking internet chatter over the possibility that we don't exist at all. Are you guys actually trying to make our hang-ups worse? The examples I could provide of this terrible insult to our national pride are truly legion, but let's take a look at a few of the more serious on-screen offenders.
Together we will make sure that this never happens to our great nation ever again.
The Street Fighter 2 player select screen. I guess this time it's understandable that Japan would be included since they feature in several stages. And, you know, they made the entire game. But I would think a fellow small Pacific nation would be better than this. You guys might be next. Okay, so that's probably not gonna happen considering Japan's global cultural impact, but we can dream. The day after tomorrow, covering the events of a global calamity, forgetting that we too are part of the globe. Unless this means we somehow didn't suffer the apocalypse. The billionaires with their New Zealand bolt holes will rejoice with this news. Ultramarine Magmao, an anime about a massive monster-filled continent rising out of nowhere in the middle of the Pacific. You'd think with its proximity to New Zealand's location would at least get our existence acknowledged. Unless Magmao destroyed New Zealand when it magicked itself up. I guess that would be better than us being forgotten once again. Personally, I think they should have called this show Ultramarine Zealandia, because realistically that's the only continent that's going to be rising around here.
We shine with the golden light of Providence.
In The Boys, we've got 2 New Zealand actors leading the show, really putting New Zealand on the map, but then no New Zealand on the map at the FBI, and then again at Vought Tower.
Treat us like we're obsolete. I am done being persecuted for my strength. You people should be thanking Christ that I am who and what I am because you need me.
I'll just wipe New York off the map.
And it's not just offshore productions sticking the boot in. Here we see one of our primetime news shows insulting us with a New Zealand-less Cop-Out 27 graphic. And even our own government is getting in on the erasure of our country with a 404 New Zealand not found message appearing on their website. But we've saved the worst for last, and unfortunately it's another kick in the guts from Star Trek. First in Deep Space Nine and Julian's spy program, but then in what I think is the most heinous example ever seen, on or off the screen. In Star Trek First Contact, New Zealand is omitted from the Earth itself.
A rehab colony back in New Zealand doesn't seem so bad right now.
The Picard literally points to where we should be. He even highlights the tiny Solomon Islands.
Solomon's?
Without New Zealand, where the hell are you guys gonna send all your convicts? After many years of foreign powers meddling in Iran's internal affairs, the despotic US-backed Shah is deposed and flees to the US, leading to a bunch of militant Iranian students with tacit support from the new regime invading the US embassy demanding the former Shah's return. The embassy higher-ups prioritizing shredding documents over the evacuation of their staff, and so most of the workers are taken hostage, with only 6 US staff managing to sneak away, an event that would become known as the Iran hostage crisis. Argo following the story of the 6 escapees who were essentially left at the mercy of other Western embassies. The CIA, with help primarily from Canada, concocting an escape plan involving the use of a phony sci-fi movie production as a cover to fly the 6 Americans out of there. And where in this mess do we fit in? Well, the entirety of this slight is delivered in one throwaway line during a Cranston diatribe 14 minutes into the movie.
The 6 of them went out a back exit. Brits turned them away, Kiwis turned them away, Canadians took them in.
I mean, it's technically true to some extent. The records show we weren't all too keen on keeping the Americans around. But what's not elaborated on is the fact that according to our diplomats, they did assist the Americans in a limited capacity, and were a small part of the escape plan seen in Argo.
You think the media is going to report on that? No, of course not.
At great personal risk, our diplomats apparently sheltered the Americans temporarily, and throughout the course of the ordeal checked in with them, brought them supplies, and even rented a house they could use as a hiding place if the need arose. They even helped drive them to the airport at the end. I think it's fair to say New Zealanders were never the heroes of the story, if there is such a thing, but we also weren't the bad allies the movie suggests we were.
You guys. You are the real heroes.
And so naturally, this one tiny on-screen misrepresentation led to a bona fide national outrage. So much so, Argo caused a bunch of saber-rattling among our politicians, triggering an official motion and demands of an apology from Ben Affleck.
The director of the movie Argo saw fit to mislead the world about what actually happened during that crisis, when in reality our courageous New Zealand diplomats' inspirational actions were of significant help to the American hostages and deserved the factual and historic record to be corrected.
Yeah, that's right, that's how seriously we take these slights. To say Argo made us aggro would be an understatement. I mean, it's kind of ironic that we demanded recognition for our deeds in later years, because when the hostage crisis actually happened, we preferred to keep our involvement secret. Officially, they'd probably say this is because of concern for our embassy workers and our general diplomatic relations with Iran. But there were also concerns about losing our substantial lamb exports to the country, which I'm sure had absolutely nothing to do with our unwillingness to take full responsibility for the Americans. Everything always goes back to the sheep. Maybe we should just be thankful that didn't make it into the movie. But it wasn't just New Zealand who was put out by the events depicted in Argo, the movie managing to irk a grand total of 4 countries. Iranians taking offense to the one-dimensional portrayal of their people, put forward as raging, bloodthirsty rabble-rousers when the reality was obviously a bit more nuanced. Britain also took umbrage over their supposed refusal to take the Americans in, something that according to their diplomats simply didn't happen. But no one got more sand in their shoe over Argo than the Canadians, who had built up a heroic national story over their efforts during the Iran hostage crisis, only to have the Americans and CIA given center stage while they had their involvement downplayed. Argo even suggesting they only reluctantly took the Americans in.
The Canadians are done. Say they're bearing too much risk. Their foreign secretary corners Vance in Brussels and told him she wants the 6 of them out.
Though the CIA did indeed play a prominent role in the entire scheme, at the time the US political establishment, like New Zealand, was happy to let the Canadians take credit for the whole thing. Look, considering the secrecy of this operation, it's not surprising there might be 1 or 2 historical inaccuracies. But come on Ben Affleck, next time do what most other people do and don't even acknowledge us at all. And now we've made it to the final entry and what I think is the most insulting of all New Zealand's on-screen slights. It's none other than the Lord of the Rings. Joking, it's Enter the Dragon. The 1973 classic, a martial arts mainstay for most, but an annoying poke in the eye for New Zealand. Enter Parsons, a so-called New Zealander. He's arrogant, he's dumb, he punches down, and he's probably racist. Wait, are we sure this guy wasn't meant to be Australian? He also possesses the worst New Zealand accent ever heard on screen.
What's your style?
The dude sounds like a drunk Sean Connery meets an even drunker Welshman.
The art of fighting without fighting?
Made all the more ridiculous when you discover that the actor playing this minor villain is Peter Archer, an Australian.
I was a local martial artist and a foreigner on the spot.
I can't believe I'm actually about to say this, but that would have been a lot more passable than whatever the hell this was meant to be.
Do I bother you?
Instead, they seem to have overdubbed him with a voice actor who has never heard a New Zealander speak. I suspect the only reason this character was even made a New Zealander is again to use our country as a mystical faraway location, adding a bit of regional flavour to the tournament.
Parsons. Yeah, from New Zealand. This man's putting quite a collection together.
But this has to be one of the earliest representations of a New Zealand character in an international movie, and we get saddled with this moronic bully.
And then I got you.
Parsons makes his presence felt rather quickly, randomly assaulting a porter for no reason and making the unfortunate mistake of picking a fight with Bruce Lee.
That island, on a beach. We can take this ball?
Bruce correctly determining that Parsons isn't worth his time, opting to instead trick him into boarding a boat and setting him adrift. What kind of idiot would fall for something like this? Is the big boat gonna wait for you? Did you run this by the captain? Or are you gonna row yourself to the tournament from there? Parsons also seems to be plagued by overconfidence, entering into an elite fighting tournament despite being a mediocre fighter. Absolutely sassed by Williams in his first bout without even landing a hit. So much for punching above our weight. I only wish Parsons had lasted long enough to be slaughtered by Bruce. And so ends the short-lived career of the worst representation of a New Zealander to ever disgrace the screens. It seems to me this Parsons guy is the antithesis of everything us Kiwis believe about ourselves. Or maybe, just maybe, he's actually an extremely accurate portrayal of how New Zealanders react when we're belittled on the screen.